Condemnation from Carrie Lam after pro-democracy protesters stormed and vandalised the Hong Kong Parliament. The clouds of tear gas are now dispersing as the city's police retake the assembly. The US president says Iran is playing with fire while the UN calls on Tehran to honour its commitments. The Islamic Republic breaks the terms of the 2015 nuclear deal, breaching the agreed limits for uranium stockpiles. And taking to the dock after coming into dock. The German captain of a migrant rescue vessel appears in court in Italy. She faces 10 years in jail for hitting a border police motorboat as she entered port in Lampedusa. Hello, I'm Thomas Waterhouse. This is the latest World News Bulletin from Paris. Hong Kong's leader has denounced Monday's violence, adding that the city's police exercised restraint in dealing with those protests. Officers used tear gas to disperse a swarm of demonstrators who charged their way into Parliament, where they daubed pro-democracy slogans on the walls and defaced MPs' portraits. That 3-hour occupancy came on the 22nd anniversary of the transfer of sovereignty to China. Chief Executive Carrie Lam says that she hopes things can get back to normal quickly.
Nothing is more important than the rule of law in Hong Kong. So I hope the community at large will agree with us that with these violent acts that we have seen, it is right for us to condemn it and hope society will return to normal.
Well, those anti-Beijing protesters continue to stress that Lam hasn't responded to their demands after a wave of recent unrest. For more on the backing that these protesters are getting, we can listen now to Malta Kading, who spoke to us earlier from the UK.
I think the vast majority is still very sympathetic to the protesters. And also, this is, of course, a minority who did the attack on the Legislative Council building. Yeah? And you might wonder, why do they go into Legislative Council building? They can't really occupy it. There's no legislative session going on there, right? But this is a symbol of the inaction of the government and the majority of legislators who are pro-government, pro-establishment, pro-Beijing. So for them, it's really, for the protesters, for the young people, it's really a matter of dealing with these negative emotions accumulating over weeks. And you know that 3 people, young people, have already committed suicide. So I think a lot of people have sympathy for this action so that they don't see many or more people committing suicide.
Moving on, the hard hammered out 2015 Iran nuclear deal was left severely dinted on Monday. Tehran has announced that it has exceeded a limit on enriched uranium reserves, which had been laid down in that accord. The British Foreign Secretary says he's deeply worried by the announcement and has called on Iran to reverse course. And after discussing the matter with his French counterpart, the US President Donald Trump has said he's got no specific message to convey to the Iranians, but he's added that the Islamic Republic's leaders know their hands are close to the tinderbox. Let's take a quick listen.
No message to Iran. They know what they're doing. They know what they're playing with, and I think they're playing with fire. So no message to Iran whatsoever.
Well, a little earlier, France 24 spoke to Barbara Slavin, the acting director of the Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She called this an unnecessary crisis, one that Europe was hoping it wouldn't have to deal with in the near future.
The agreement gave confidence that Iran would not have the material necessary to make a single nuclear weapon until the year 2030. So what the Trump administration has done is triggered a completely unnecessary crisis. You can object to other Iranian policies in the region. There are human rights abuses, many things that they do. But at least the nuclear issue was somehow parked, for 15 years. And now, because of the Trump administration's actions, we have a nuclear crisis as well. So it's really, I find it very hard to understand the mentality of the administration unless the sole goal is to weaken Iran and, if possible, overthrow its regime, which some members of the Trump administration seem to want to do.
It's time now for a brief look at some other world news. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for another deadly attack in the Afghan capital, which has claimed the lives of at least 6 people and injured over 100 others. A lorry packed with explosives went off during rush hour this Monday, close to the Defence Ministry building. The government says that all 5 assailants were killed in a subsequent gunfight with security forces. State media in Syria says 4 civilians have been killed and 21 others injured in Israeli airstrikes this Monday. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights puts the death toll higher, though, at 15. As yet, there's been no official statement from Israel about the missile attacks, which targeted military positions in Homs province and in the Damascus suburbs. And the son of Tunisia's president says his father has now left hospital and that he'll be heading back to work in the coming days. 92-year-old Beji Kaid Essebsi was rushed to a military clinic in the capital on Thursday after suffering what authorities called a severe health crisis. He'll now continue his recovery at his own residence in Carthage. Now, there's still more bickering than concrete picking in the corridors of power in Brussels. EU leaders will be heading back to the negotiating table this Tuesday to try and break the deadlock over the nomination of the bloc's top jobs. The French president says the union's credibility has been fundamentally strained by the prolonged meetings, which have failed to bear fruit.
This failure is due to division, political division at the heart of the European Conservatives, which we can see in the failure of its leaders to reach an agreement. It's also due to geographical differences at the heart of the Council, which has meant that despite all the efforts during the night, the announcement of a decision to be pushed back to 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. This is so in the coming hours we can rest and find calm, so that we can reach a solution. This means everyone has to change their position a bit.
Well, a short while ago, we were joined live here on France 24 by Thomas Vitiello, a researcher at Cevipof and a professor at Paris's Sciences Po Political School. This is what he had to say about how this nomination process has damaged Franco-German relations.
Here, for the first time in a long time, a real confrontation between France and Germany. Germany had quite some key top jobs in the last European Commission, European Parliament, or I also think about financial institutions within the EU, where Germany had the presidency of several of them. And France challenging that. France challenging this domination of top jobs by Germany. And Angela Merkel, who is not going to run again in a national election, who has been open to compromise, she's not seeking for re-election, and she knows, I believe, that compromise is the way to go within the European institutions. But the Christian Democrats in Germany don't think this way, as they will now try to detach themselves from Angela Merkel, so by challenging her authority, both in Germany and within the European Parliament. And so yes, there is a confrontation between France and Germany here.
The German skipper of the humanitarian rescue ship Sea-Watch 3 will learn her fate later, with judges set to deliver their verdict on her case. The 31-year-old remains under house arrest after appearing in court in Sicily. She was detained at the weekend for colliding with a police boat as she brought her ship into harbour with over 40 migrants on board. Ellen Gainsford reports.
She faces up to 10 years in prison if convicted. Captain Carola Rackete appeared before a Sicilian court this Monday. A volunteer for German charity Sea-Watch, she was arrested this weekend following a 2-week standoff with the Italian authorities. She'd been attempting to bring a group of migrants ashore on the island of Lampedusa when her rescue vessel knocked a police speedboat.
Carola sacrificed herself to bring these people to shore. Even when she was arrested, she was asking, have the people disembarked? Are they on land? That was the only thing she wanted to know.
Speaking from her boat last Friday, Rackete described the mental health issues many of the migrants were suffering. They'd been at sea for 17 days, following their rescue off the coast of Libya. Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini accuses Rackete of deliberately trying to sink the police patrol boat, describing the event as an act of war. Meanwhile, Germany's foreign minister has called for Rakiti, who's a German citizen, to be released.
Saving lives can't be a crime. It's a humanitarian act, and it must be treated as such. It should not be criminalized. That's why we can't understand the events taking place in Italy.
Italy's populist government has taken a hardline stance against NGO rescue boats. Rome insists it hosts more than its fair share of migrants and is demanding that other European countries do more to help carry the load.
For the first time in 3 decades, a different kind of catch has been brought ashore in Japan. A flotilla of whaling ships have been able to head out to sea after the country pulled out of the International Whaling Commission at the end of last year. The government says it will now allow the harpooning of 227 of the mammals in its waters. Maud Julien has more.
For the first time in over 30 years, Japanese ships set off for a commercial whale hunt. The practice was long banned for environmental reasons, and now Japanese whalers have to comply with a quota.
I heard that the quota that's imposed by Japan's fisheries agency is something that would not affect resources for the next 100 years. We want to whale in a sustainable manner.
Japan's last commercial hunt was in 1986, but it continued killing whales for what it called research purposes, catching an estimated 1,000 animals per year. With the new quotas in place, environmentalists say that there will in fact be less whale deaths.
Japan is now going to kill 227 whales. This is 227 whales that should not be killed. But this is not what threatens the whales population. The truth is that right now, Japan is just admitting that it's commercial whaling, and it's going to kill much less whales than it was doing it under the scientific permit. So this is not such a bad news for whales.
Japan's tradition of whale hunting can be traced back to the 7th century, reaching its peak in the 1950s. But despite its cultural importance, whaling is a small industry, only employing around 300 people and representing 0.1% of all meat eaten.
Historically speaking, the connection between Japanese people and whales has always been strong, but whale meat is far less popular than beef or pork now.
Conservationists argue that the controversial tradition of whale hunting is bound to disappear, but many say the biggest threat to the huge mammals now is overfishing, which disrupts the ocean's ecosystem, leading to thousands of whale deaths.
And finally, one set of vehicles are now no longer welcome on the streets of Paris. In a bid to clean up the City of Light, authorities have banned all diesel vehicles which are 13 years old or over. Diesel trucks and motorbikes of the same age are also banned in the very centre of the capital. Wassim Cornet explains.
Paris and its suburbs are cracking down on heavy polluters. Until recently, the most polluting vehicles were only banned during smog alerts. Now, though, they must stay off the capital's streets Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., rain or shine. The ban targets diesel vehicles sold before 2006 and motorbikes registered prior to 2004. The goal is to lower pollution across the Paris metro area, but not everyone is on board.
They're not pleased, they're not happy, because they aren't very fortunate, so they drive in vehicles that are quite old. So for them it's like, well, here we go, I'm going to have to invest in a new vehicle.
Motorists who ignore the restrictions in central Paris face a €68 fine, but offenders in the suburbs where car dependency is higher will face no punishment for the first 2 years of the ban. Still, though, authorities are encouraging car owners in the greater Paris area to consider buying new vehicles. The government is offering financial help in order to do so. City Hall says the measures are necessary.
It's not acceptable for France to continue to lag behind other European countries where automated checks have existed for years now. These physical checks are necessary, but it's still not enough in light of the magnitude of the health issue it represents.
A report by Greenpeace lists Paris as the worst Western European capital for small particle air pollution. The city is hoping to phase out all diesel vehicles by the time it hosts the Summer Olympics in 2024.
That brings you up to date this hour. Do stay with us here on France 24. Our world news coverage continues.